Hey, Russ.
Hold on, I don't know that we're quite there. I don't think it's streaming in quite yet, but let's hope it is. Good morning, Pam. How's it going?
How are you doing, Russ?
It's been a crazy week. Last week, we had a fair bit of travel off to Phoenix, Arizona, and then up to Seattle. Did some work with a great company up there. Let's just give you a clue. They are doing some incredible work with ChatGPT and OpenAI,
Hi.
and pushing. Yeah, it really, really is. And then got back to the East Coast. How about you? How was your week last week?
It was great. I actually had the opportunity to meet Obama's former speechwriter,
Oh my
and
God,
so
that's been incredible.
it was fabulous. Young dynamo woman. I say young. Anyone younger than me is young, but dynamo woman who just had some great insights into communication. I mean, she really talks about speech writing, but it's applicable to absolutely anything. But she said this one thing that I just loved, and I actually wrote it down and put it at my computer. But life erases storytelling and replaces it with PowerPoint. And I thought,
Oh my
isn't
gosh.
that true? You know, as everyone comes out of school where they've all told stories all their life, and then suddenly, bam, get to work and get that PowerPoint going.
Well, isn't it true, right? Jeff Bezos famously banned PowerPoint and had the idea that you would write a couple page memo that would be presented to everybody who's going into the meeting before the meeting. And the idea was that you would think of it almost as a press release of what the idea was, what was going to achieve, because the narrative was just destroyed with PowerPoint, taken away entirely.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Oh, that's
she
fascinating.
also adds to that. Yeah, she adds to that and says, "Tell your story in 10 words." If you and then and then bring up everything, then build the story. But if you can't encapsulate it in 10 words, then you're already lost.
So I think we've got a
So
bit of
anyway,
an issue with this. This. I mean, we'll get into today's story, but I actually think that could be another story sometime, because I think we're getting into the situation right now where that is harder and harder for people to do. We've almost trained people, and maybe it goes all the way back to college and university, where writing a paper is what you do, and the idea then of distilling that into, gosh, even a page, let alone 10 words, I think is a skill that so many of us could benefit from.
yeah, and I wonder how the kids. I mean, I think actually it's relevant to the Wendy's discussion on dynamic pricing, but we'll come to that.
Yeah.
Um, I think the kids already have it in them because they're doing their 140 characters or less Twitters all the time, X's, whatever it is, and their TikTok videos all the time. So they've got it in them.
Yeah.
But then we put them into business and we squeeze that out of them and make them, turn into these voluminous, is that a word?
We'll
People
make it away.
who
Yeah.
yeah, suddenly, don't do the brevity that they actually have already got in them. So I think it's kind
So
of
true.
interesting.
So true. And the TikTok short form videos, the interesting thing is I did a bunch of videos last year on guidance of my marketing team. And I really, when I got into it, it was fine. But getting into it was actually really, really hard. And this is sort of another parallel, right? We can run off to a separate little discussion on. But when you're trying to generate and create content, not for the sake of just creating content, but because you have something substantive to say, I actually found that the harder I worked at it, the better it got, of course. Now, that's no surprise. But being able to distill, here's John. Hey, John, good morning. John's coming in. He might not be able to hear us just yet, but he's coming in. John is going to weigh in from a conference he's at this morning. How are you doing,
John
John?
he's at the PDAC, Prospectors and Developers Conference in Toronto. I think it's the biggest mining event globally. Yeah,
Can
a
John,
couple of
John,
many
can you hear?
thousands.
And it's quite nice that it's in Toronto. John, can you hear us? I don't know if John can hear us. So we'll message
He'll
him. We'll let him
he'll
know that
figure
we
out.
can't really hear him. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, look. So
So,
today's conversation is we wanted to dive in a little bit to something that happened last week around when you can hear us now with dynamic pricing and what ultimately happened. So I can give a bit of a backstory, or Pam, do you want to give a backstory?
yeah, you go and I'll weigh in.
Okay, so I've got a couple of notes here because I took a few notes. So what was fascinating is that last week, so Wendy's have a relatively new CEO. The CEO is formerly PepsiCo. He's been on the job for like a month, right? And so he has a call with investors. And I'm going to read you what he talked about on this call. Now, he's also talking about the fact that, they're profitable, they're doing quite well. However, like so many other companies, they're being squeezed a little bit with rising prices and increased labor costs and so on. So it's a dynamic conversation we're having here. So here's what he says. Beginning as early as 2025, we will begin testing more enhanced features like dynamic pricing and daypart offerings, along with AI-enabled menu changes and suggestive selling, he said. As we continue to show the benefit of this technology in our company-operated restaurants, franchisee interest in digital menu boards should increase, further supporting sales and profit growth across the system. They're going to invest $20 million this year in putting these new digital menu boards in all of their US restaurants, which actually seems like not very much to me. And by the end of 25, that'll be done. And then they're going to invest a further $10 million to put them in all of their restaurants globally, these digital menus. So that's what he says. We're going to introduce dynamic pricing and day part offerings. So you can imagine what happened next.
I think didn't Elizabeth Warren even weigh in on this?
She did. She said, why is it that your burger should cost more at lunchtime than at dinner time? When the cost to the restaurant has not changed. I think that's the interesting part, that the cost to the restaurant hasn't changed. Look, I think it's fascinating, right? We've got dynamic pricing. That's what a happy hour is. Happy hour is dynamic pricing. It's no different, right? But I think the idea, at least for my ticket, is that poor Mr. Tanner, 1 month into the job, was reading something that had been written by his investor relations team, but he obviously must have proofed it, I hope. And instead of telling us all we'd probably get a discount at slower times of the day, the read we all took, right, was that dynamic pricing means that if we're really hungry at lunchtime, it's going to cost us more for the same burger. So curious, let's weigh in on this. John, hi, if you can hear us, good morning.
No, technical difficulties still.
No, okay, carry on. So Pam, what's your take? Let's weigh in.
Oh, I think this is actually a communication problem. I think that the way that it was rolled out and communicated created a crisis that didn't need to be there in the customer base. And I'll preface it by saying I'm not a retail expert. I have worked in hospitality in my first act. But really, this is a CEO communication issue. And it was really around what the market perceived from what the message was that was intended. And they're two quite different things. And I think that what happened was interesting for a number of different reasons. One is you've got a marketplace that is completely inflation and cost conscious right now. So any communication around pricing, and this is a communication that's a year ahead of when it's going to get released. So you've got all these sensitivities around inflation, which is also a communication problem, because I think in the US, I'm not in the US, but I think in the US your inflation has been coming down month on month. For quite inflation's out of control, which is kind of interesting in itself. But that all rolls into how people feel about, I think, two major items. One is fairness. People immediately thought, oh my goodness, I'm not going to be treated fairly because I'm going to come at a different time of day. And the other is that whole concept of shrinking that's happening at the moment.
Yes.
That inflation shrinking. So those are the two areas that I think people just naturally go to. When in reality, that was not what Wendy's was really talking about. They're not talking about gouging people to increase the price. No. They're actually talking about, we'll make it cheaper for you if you come another time. And that's just bad comms.
Well, you're absolutely right. I think there was something interesting that when the PR machine started to pick up that this had been a complete disaster in terms of what people heard in that conversation, they correctly pointed out that, in fact, they never used the word surge, although the media picked up on, dynamic pricing. Well, that's what Uber does with surge pricing. and no one likes to feel surged. I don't know about you, but I kind of trade the apps off a little bit against each other. So if I'm trying to get a car and I sort of go, oop, gosh, Uber's like $80. Let me see what Lyft is right now, and I'll trade them off a little bit. But the point in that is that I actually have choice. I'm standing at the street corner, and I can either stick my hand in the air and call a cab, or I can check on these two apps. But if I go to a Wendy's, the thought that I might arrive there wanting my favorite meal, and to then have the price be 20, 50 cents more, or potentially less, but that's not what we think about, right? Takes away that choice element for me, because I'm now not going to get back in my car and say to my kids, sorry, we're not having Wendy's. We're going to go to the other place that we don't like down the street. So it had a massive effect on psyche, despite the fact that you're right. What he said wasn't surge pricing, but that's what we heard.
That's what we heard, yeah. And I think, I'm all for cross-industry learning. So the whole concept of dynamic pricing, I think I told you the story, straight away when we talked about this. I worked with a major cement manufacturer, Lafarge, for a number of years in my consulting days. And they went to dynamic pricing. Now let me give you the story of dynamic pricing that hit me personally. So my next door neighbor built a new house. Took them 5 years. And during that 5 years, I listened, I had the dirt and the grime and the drilling and blasting. And this is a 4-story. They had to drill down 100 feet or so. So it was not a pleasant experience as a neighbour. And one Friday night on a beautiful summer evening, and it is about 7:15ish. So, and I think the building code says you've got to stop at around 7.
Yeah.
So it past that hour. I'm sitting on my back patio. I've opened a bottle of wine, and suddenly I hear the sound of that wonderful beep, beep, beep as it reverses into my construction site. And exactly right, the cement truck is going around. So by this point, I'm not a happy camper. And I walk outside and I go and I say to the guy, where's your site manager? I'd like to have a word with them. And I said to him, it's way past your building time. So you can't be doing this Friday. And it's Friday night. Monday night, maybe. Friday night, beautiful evening.
No.
I've opened a wine. I don't want to listen to you pour cement. And he said, I'll never forget. He said, listen, love, don't worry. We'll be done real soon. This is the only time we can get the cement truck here. And what he was doing was dynamic pricing. It is cheaper to get your cement delivered out of hours, late night, middle of the night, early morning, anytime except, or probably not early morning, anytime except when you've got peak demand. And so that dynamic pricing model drove that construction team to bring in that cement truck on a Friday night after hours. I'm not a happy camper. Needless to say, they did not continue to pour their cement that evening because I'm not a happy camper. And that's the problem with communication. Because if you haven't done the homework and really made sure that you've got that comms right, you're going to end up with a marketplace that's unhappy and that's not really into what you're trying to sell. So in that case, a little call to me saying, hey, we're going to work late tonight probably would have worked. And in this case, a CEO who really can figure out how to communicate this in a way that the marketplace is not going to react poorly. And don't get me wrong, I think it's great to pay less money at a different time of day. But I'm not sure that your Wendy's, market wants to eat lunch as afternoon tea.
John, good morning. How's the conference?
The conference is great. Can you? I'm having a little bit of a technology challenge. So can you hear me? Okay. I brought my my headset in to actually connect with you, just like you're using, and then found out that that my phone doesn't actually have the headpiece connection. I can only be wireless, and obviously that is a technology challenge for somebody like my age, because I'm like, wireless? I haven't even figured out wireless. But anyways, the conference is great. We had, interestingly, we were talking about, so this is a national mining conference. It's the producers and developers. There's about 30,000 people will be here over the 3 days. This morning I met with two senior, well, they're both board members, but they were CEOs. One they're both Canadian, and they're both in base metals. But and we were talking at since they're both on the boards of some fairly major companies, which will go unnamed right now. But we were talking about communication and the board's responsibility around safety and communication. So the board was actually and to your point, Pam, the board observes. So typically a board member wants to be, eyes, nose in or eyes on and fingers off or hands off, and so they're observing. And the conversation that we were having was, what are you seeing around within your operation around how the leadership, how effective they're communicating, and how effective they are at engaging the employees. And both of the guys are talking about, that the safety is I think we've progressed a fair ways down the path on safety, but they're talking about safety not as a procedural issue, but as a communication issue. That you actually have to be able to, leadership has to be involved. They have to be communicating effectively around, what are the values of the organization, and what are our expectations. And the two guys are saying, that's something that we're still learning to do. We've got the procedures in place. We have the right sort of safety metrics. We're doing we're having the safety meetings, we're doing the safety audits, all of that, but we're still not communicating as effectively as what we would want to. So I think that, to a certain extent, the Wendy's example, although it's not a safety relation, is about, as Pam was saying, it's about communication.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We need to do a deep dive on everything else that you're learning there, John. But I think, certainly from a communication point, one of the interesting things, right, is that I think that the relationship between, no question, between employees and management has evolved from what it was when managers could simply say, this is what you now need to go and do. And far for the better, we're now encouraging people to bring their minds to work in ways that we didn't before. So challenge and look for ideas and look for opportunities. That means it's less telling and more creating the story, creating the compelling reason why I might want to listen and understand. A long time ago, and I guess some places still do this, the whole "what's in it for me" thing. It was a big narrative in the world of trying to get people to change behavior some time ago. It's not unimportant today, but I think it's misplaced. It's not about what's in it for me. It's about sort of how am I contributing to building something. So what's my role in this, right? And I think that's the interesting part of safety as well. We're working with a utility. And of course, safety is a massive part of this. And there's procedures and protocols, and yet things still happen. And so the question becomes, why do they happen? When you start, inverting that question, and how do we avoid it? A lot of it does come down to people understanding why they want to act differently, fundamentally. So I think the interesting part. Pam, back to your cement example.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Well, back to your cement example. So why do we not have a hard time when, I want to fly to Australia and I book 3 months in advance and it costs me, $1,500, but I book 2 weeks in advance, it's going to cost me $4,000. Why do we not have a hard time with that, but I have a hard time with paying 50 cents more for a burger?
Well, I think we do have a hard time with dynamic pricing airlines as well. I think that the marketplace just says we don't have a choice. If you want to fly to Australia and you haven't got the notice period to do it, it's just going to cost you more. And so I think that people get on that flight understanding that they've paid a premium compared to the guy sitting next to them, who has probably paid a third of what you've now paid because you're late to the game. And I actually think that that whole concept of fairness, kicks back in. and you've got a customer base already on the plane who has a feeling of, and I don't want to say entitlement, but they feel they've paid more, and so now they've come with a different mindset around the experience that they want to get. So I actually think that it's a big roll-on effect. It's almost the whole concept of unintended consequences. So you've paid for your trip, but now your customer is going to demand more. That passenger is not going to roll back and say, yeah, okay, it's delayed a little bit, it doesn't matter. Right. It does now because I'm paying double, sometimes triple that I am for the guy who's sitting next to me. Mm-hmm. So my take would be more around, what are the consequences around all of that, and how far can you push that pricing to the point where you're not peeing off your customer or your passenger, and they accept it as being okay. That's the cost of coming late to the game, versus now I resent this and I really want more in return, and I want a better service. And I think that's part of the airline problem in terms of the experience for a lot of people today. But, you talk about, if we're going to talk, just back on the Wendy's example and the communication, what I found interesting as well was that the CEO then had to, of course, come back and clarify. And he had to, he's not backtracking because he actually never really said what the marketplace, thought he said. But what he's got to do is clarify so that the marketplace can better understand what they're trying to do, because he also likely doesn't want to change the whole strategy because of a misinterpretation or a miscommunication. So, and there's a great author, great book, Communication Specialist, that I read 100 years ago. I swear it was 25 years ago. It's called Drop the Pink Elephant. It was actually after the Clinton administration, because he uses a Clinton example, which we won't go into here. But it's worth reading just to understand what went on with a certain communication around that. But he says when something goes wrong, what you've got to do is follow a really simple formula to try to rapidly alter the perception in the marketplace. Now, he uses a couple of really tragic examples, which makes me think of Boeing and the issues around their crashes. What should have happened there? But he just says 3 words. And to remember it easily, it's just 3 R's. You've got to regret. You've got to immediately show regret for what you've done wrong, whether you did it wrong or not. You've got to give the reason why, and then you've got to give the remedy. And I think that's that is in itself an interesting learning for any miscommunication at a senior executive level. Once it's out there, it's out there. And all that you can do is really attempt to remedy that situation with a logical comeback. So, regret, reason, and remedy. I think those 3 R's are something that every senior exec today needs to kind of keep in the back of their minds, because in today's world, you are going to screw up more often than not. The communication is going to be wrong because you've got such a broad audience, you've got such rapid communication. My heart goes out to managers and leaders today because I just have a huge empathy for them. I think that we're very quick to say, bad leader or bad management team or bad this, when really they've got plates spinning and so many different types of messaging and internal, external, shareholders, employees, community. You've just, it's a real balancing act every day. So I think that's going to be something that people really have to hone in on, is how to handle when things go wrong, just as much as getting it right.
Well, if you think about that,
well,
too.
and I think,
John.
Pam, as well, the point, and this is what we were talking about today. While leadership is setting the example, communication, effective communication is at all levels. So it's not just the executive suite that has to communicate this, but the supervisor needs to talk to the frontline. The frontline workers need to talk to the customers. The communication has to go across the organization, and that effective communication is, not only a capacity for change, the speed of change, how quickly you can implement, all of that sort of, that's the muscle that drives, performance, effective communication across the entire organization, getting everybody aligned. We're all going to turn right. Bang. It's to use the example that I use. This is like ballet. It's choreography as opposed to road hockey. Road hockey, you get out on the road with all of your neighbors, and you have a ball and you have a net, and sort of like all the kids, you sort of pick teams, and we all understand the objective is to put the ball in the net. Hopefully the other person's net, not your net. And as opposed to choreography, which is, it doesn't matter whether it's a hockey arena or the stage of the Met. On the third bar, on that note, the little ballerina is going to come out from stage left, hit center stage. The blue spotlight is going to come on. It's on that beat, and it doesn't matter where it is. When we're talking choreography and communication, when you're talking at in an artistic, to an artistic company, everybody is aligned. We're all aligned. We're all going to get that ballerina out on that note, and the blue spotlight is going to turn on, and we're all going to make that happen. So I think in a lot of cases, companies are still playing road hockey where they should be thinking about ballet.
I love the metaphor. I don't know if I ever told you this, but I was on
Russell,
the
I have to interrupt there. Not only do I love the metaphor, but it's coming from a mining guy.
I know. Maybe there's a session at the conference that we're going to do next year on what mining can learn from ballet. Let's think about this. I think there's a story here. But I was on the board of the Charlotte Ballet for about 6 years. And one of the things that they did early on was to help those of us that were not dancers. I'm not a dancer. Was to appreciate how much goes into this. So at one of our board retreats, we were paired up with a dancer, and I get paired up with this dancer who I didn't know. He was young. He had just finished maybe a year or two post high school, and dancing was going to be his career. And so he and I get paired together, and we've got maybe a 30-second dance that we need to choreograph and do. But it's got to be in front of everybody on the stage. So there's me, who is, two left feet, right? But I do very passionate a believer in the arts, and I respect the artists. And we did this thing together. I can't even remember what it was. John, you'd know the actual moves, but I don't even know if they call them moves in ballet. Is that what they call them? But we did these things where we were jumping and leaping. And
they're steps. They're not moves, they're steps.
They're steps. But the precision, and you're absolutely right, that when I first started off and he did it, I thought, all right, I can kind of follow that. But you realize you've got to be in perfect sync. We looked horrific. It taught me a ton, but I didn't expect you to go there with the ballet metaphor at a mining conference when we're talking about Wendy's. So that's just terrific. Thank you. That's a good segue for us this morning.
If I remember rightly, John, I think you've used that ballet story with the mining guys for many, many, many years now. It always works.
It does work.
Yeah, you are trying to get people to look at their business differently. Another great, an analogy from ballet or from dance or artistic is talking about the strength of an organization is really around not only being able to have that alignment. We're all, focused. The show must go on. This is what we're going to do, but it's also how people approach their work. And the way that, in an artistic environment, everybody is pulling together, but they are all starting from the point of having discipline, meaning that they are going to practice their steps. You're not going to have to, when you're calling a rehearsal, everybody already knows their lines. We're not going to the rehearsal to learn our lines. We already know our lines. We're going to the rehearsal to rehearse how we're going to say it and how we're going to react to other people. So that, and you don't have to require an actor or a dancer or an opera singer, you don't require them to learn their lines. That's part of their discipline. They understand that as a profession, that's that's one of the things that they're coming to work with. So, when you're talking about mining or Wendy's even, what is the discipline that we're this is a profession, but we also are doing this from not, they are loving their work. So how do we get love back into and loving the work and loving, showing up for the team, not just for yourself? How do we bring that into, and in mining, that's so important because, the reason that you're going there is to participate in a group effort. It's not an individual effort.
A dangerous group effort.
Yeah.
A potentially dangerous group effort. And I don't think it's just mining. I see, and Pam, you do too, I think. Just levels of, I don't want to say disengagement, but it all comes down to the role that communication plays in helping people to appreciate if this is the right place for them, why they should want to sort of put their shoulder in and make it a place where 40 hours a week, 45 hours a week, they're doing their best work for themselves. Because ultimately, you're right, communication is the power of I think the agency of change, huge, massive, in how people can show up and perform differently. We could probably draw a good correlation here between the leaders that are great communicators. I certainly can anecdotally, and I'm thinking about this now. Those that have taken the time to get good at communicating and to become better at communicating, and those that are successful in leading, not just company transformations, but just anything. I think there's a high correlation there. I'd expect. What do you think?
I think understanding and learning the connection between message sent and message received. Are you getting it right? And is it a straight line, or is it, going all over the place before it gets to message received? And the ability to make that a straight line, which is take all the noise out of it, take anything out of it that's going to cause it to go off the rails. I think that's the real, learning. That's the challenge, I think, for most leaders. And it also depends on the audience and interaction, level of trust, and how much you know them, understand them, where they're coming from as well. So I think all of it comes together. But just to keep on topic to the Wendy's, I think there it's almost, and I think it comes up in any communication, it's almost asking the question at the very beginning, when you're going to be communicating something that is sensitive, and so pricing or a change in pay, a change that affects an individual personally. So whether it's a company making a change on a consumer or whether it's a company making a change on an employee, I think that one of the questions people have to ask themselves is, how will this be interpreted from a fairness perspective?
Yeah.
Because, in the old days, people would say, oh, life's not fair, it's not meant to be fair, and you shouldn't have to worry about fairness. Rubbish. Fairness resonates with people.
It's a basic principle. Yeah.
Human people fight for fairness, and so I think that's where you really have to make sure that you're asking the question, how will this be perceived from a fairness perspective?
Did you see what Burger King sent out in response to this?
Bless them for taking advantage of another organization's mishap.
I mean, God, who would ever do that? Who would ever do that? John, they tweeted out, they said, we don't believe in charging people more when they're hungry. And they followed on by then offering everybody discounts for the week on their Whoppers. So back to the point of fairness.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. And back to the point of miscommunication, because
absolutely,
Wendy's was not they were going to pay more when they're hungry.
That's right. Well, my hope is that they're able to take these learnings and actually spin them up for a positive advantage. Lots of people are talking about Wendy's now. Lots of people are focused on their menu now. So there's an opportunity for them to figure out how to really channel that energy and that interest. I want to be mindful of where we are. We've got 35 minutes in. John, what's on the rest of what's on the cards for today at the conference?
We're so at the PDAC, this is the producers and developers. I'm talking to them. There's obviously the speed of change within mining is pretty rapid, and it's being driven by electrification, decarbonization, the climate change, all of that. And it's how do we reorient ourselves? How do we turn that ship, quickly? And I would have to say that there's an awful lot running out in the mining space already with ESG, corporate social responsibility, and things like that. So change within this industry is the pressures for change. That's all intensifying. And so it's interesting having conversations around, how are we doing that? Because predominantly we're talking to engineers, and the engineers are looking for systems. They're looking for methodology. They're looking for solutions, and really what I'm talking to them about is developing capability. So a lot of interesting conversations going on.
Oh, terrific. Well, we'll have to do a regroup next week and see what the big insights were, what the big takeaways were. We'd love that. All right, Pam, parting words from you this morning. I think your microphone is off.
That is because I have been serenaded by my 10-month-old 100-pound puppy all through this, and I've been attempting for you not to hear his singing. But yeah, I think the message is around that perception. You've got to really dissect your communication now to make sure that you don't get these unintended consequences. And I think that Wendy's was just a classic example of an unintended consequence. And as you say, may they leverage that to their advantage now, because their competition certainly has.
Yeah, 100%. It's something that you said struck me, and it's something that I feel quite strongly about, is that how quick we are to judge managers and leaders and critique them as being good and bad. It's a hard place to be. It's a tough job to have, and I think the line between being a manager and being a leader is increasingly eroding. How to draw that line is a hard one. So we're going to make these mistakes, and I think unfortunately we spotted this one this week. But in companies all over, leaders and managers are struggling with elements of how do I deliver a line around profit, but also care, or around contribution and yes, valuing you and wanting to unionize, not wanting to. I think the struggles are very real, and so may the force be with managers and leaders who are trying to do their very best to create the best environments for everybody who shows up every day, because it's a hard job. All right.
Agreed.
On that note, let's look forward to next week. We'll try and get a message out a little bit earlier next week, or this week, about what we're going to talk about next week. So look forward to our conversation next week. And John, enjoy the conference. We're looking forward to hearing more about it. Okay.
Great to see you
all.
guys.
Have a good Tuesday. Cheers. Bye.
Great to see you guys. Thanks very much. Cheers.